let's get the conversation rolling. It's my name's Travis Sandusky. So first off, thank you all for tuning in and spending your lunch hour with us. I'm a public engagement consultant for SaskPower. This is our second session in a 5-part series about our future power system, or about our power system in general. Last week, our colleagues chatted about various sources for power, some of the pressures that are driving us to change the way where we generate that power. So some of those power sources. Today, I'm going to focus the conversation around how our power moves. And to do that, 2 of my colleagues have joined us. First up, Andrew Monroe. Andrew is the manager of Asset Information and Energy Services. It's a bit of a mouthful. Andrew, what exactly does that mean? What are you responsible for?
Yeah, so on the power to move side, for the energy, that's the energy services side of that title. And my group administers the open access transmission tariff for SaskPower. So that's how companies and people can basically reserve access on SaskPower's transmission system in a open, non-discriminatory manner, and they can move electricity within or across the province if they choose to. So how they can leverage the SaskPower transmission system and use it to move energy.
Oh, interesting. All right, thanks for being here today. Also with us is Raman Mal. Raman is the Director of Transmission Engineering. Less of a mouthful, but still an enigma. Raman, what does that exactly mean?
Travis, my group, Transmission Engineering, we handle all the engineering design on our transmission systems, so our 72,000 kV, 72 kV volts and higher transmission system. So that's transmission lines, transmission switching stations, and protection and control facilities as well.
Perfect. So thanks for being here. I think this is 2 of the smartest folks I know, and I look forward to picking your brains today. So today we're using it's a webinar platform. However, I'm hoping the session doesn't look and feel like a traditional presentation style webinar where Andrew and Raman are just going to speak at you folks. I'm hoping it's going to come across, or it's going to be more of a conversation style or that podcast interview style. So we've pulled together a number of questions that we hear from time to time, and over the next hour or so, I'm going to pick Raman and Andrew's brains about how we generate power, move it across the province, distribute it to our homes and businesses. So how do we manage the grid? And in a nutshell, how do we keep the lights on, or what happens when the lights go out, or what's those causes? The work we do here at SaskPower reaches the ancestral lands of many nations. For Raman, Andrew, and myself, we are sharing our ideas and coming together from Regina, which is on Treaty 4 territory and homeland of the Métis. This past Friday was September 30th, which marked the 2nd year of our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I hope many of you were able to set aside some time and attend a local event, or set aside some time to recognize and reflect upon the tragic history and the legacy of residential schools. All right, so a few quick notes about how to submit your questions, get in contact with us if you're having some technical difficulties. At the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a black banner. That banner includes a chat function. This is how we're going to deal with tech support issues. So Anna, who's signed in as tech support today, as she's helping on the back end, she's going to monitor the chat and hopefully help any folks out that need that. So click on that chat button, a new pop-up box will appear, and there you can send a message directly to Anna, and hopefully she can help you out, or better yet, you don't need it. Questions, on the other hand, we don't want you to put those in the chat. We want you to use the Q&A feature of Zoom here. So very similar, when you click on that Q&A button, a new pop-up box is going to appear, and there you can enter your question, click send. Those come straight back to myself, Raman, Andrew, and Anna. Like, we're the only ones that can see that. They don't get posted to the whole group. So what you'll likely see is we're either going to write you back, or somebody's going to write you back, and you'll get that answer in writing in that Q&A function, or we're going to try to answer them live. And so we'll notice that. Anna will mark off that we've covered that off in our conversation, or I've pulled it up and asked one of these gentlemen live, and you'll see that that in that Q&A window as well, that it was answered live. Before I slide into the notes, or before I slide into the Q&A portion, I got a couple other housekeeping notes. We are recording this session, and we're going to try to share that through our online engagement hub. And if you have questions that you didn't get an opportunity to ask, or perhaps fall outside the topic of what we're trying to chat about today, that online engagement hub's a really good place to send those to us. So you can poke them right on the website itself, or there's an email address where we'll receive those. Those questions come to somebody like myself, and they're generally answered by somebody like Robin or Andrew. Okay, let's get going. So for today's conversation, I really wanted to start with where our power comes from, or what we call generation, and sometimes I think I've already referred to as a supply option. So up on the screen right now, you see a map of SaskPower's generation system. I'm going to ask Anna to post a link in the chat if you guys want to have a better look at this map, or play around with it in the future, you can. So on here, I see a lot of different colored boxes that shows different supply options and a whole lot of activity clustered in and around that central south part of the province. So Andrew, can you walk me through what folks are seeing on this map in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, sure, Travis. So here, obviously, SaskPower's map, it shows where the generation facilities are, and also shows some high-level details for where the transmission lines are that connect within the province. So we've got, as you can see, we've got natural gas. It's about 41% of our current power mix. Coal is about 24%. Wind is 12%, and hydropower, which includes hydro generated within Saskatchewan and also imports from Manitoba, is around 19% of that mix. There's some purple boxes there that on the right-hand side that show some of our interconnections or interties or tie lines, and those tie lines they help us either import or export electricity to our neighboring jurisdictions, like to Manitoba or Alberta, or to the states in North Dakota. We have ties on all three of those borders. Solar is a bit harder to see on this map. It comes in the form of typical, as of now, there's no utility scale solar projects, but there is one coming up soon to be in service. And then we have behind the meter solar as well. And then there's some other sources that we have, like that aren't showing up on the map. Like we have some smaller projects like biomass, flare gas, and landfill gas as well.
Oh, excellent. So it's well, thanks for that, Andrew. Like I really appreciate looking at this map. I know, like for myself, I grew up near one of our coal communities, and maybe up until about a decade ago, that was my view of our power grid. I knew power was generated from facility at one of our coal facilities at Coronach or Estevan, and I knew my lights came on when I hit the switch, and I wouldn't have guessed that we had so much coal or so much gas or hydro on our system. When I look at this map and I see those 7 gas facilities or 7 hydro stations, it was a little eye-opening for me.
Yeah, and I think too also one thing that we see here is you see lots of different colors on the map. So it's not just one color. There's a couple different several different sources of electricity that we have, which I think has helped SaskPower historically by being diversified and not reliant on just coal or just hydro or just wind. We've got a mixture of things that I think have helped us. And I think I saw a question come in the chat, Travis. Can I answer that now?
Yeah, please jump in.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the question was who maintains the transmission lines where we have interties. So really, it's up to within our provincial boundaries is where we own and operate and maintain those transmission lines. We do have joint operating agreements or interconnection agreements with our neighboring jurisdictions, like with Manitoba Hydro in Manitoba, or in the States, it's Southwest Power Pool is below us. In Alberta is the acronym is ASO, the Alberta Electric System Operator. So we have agreements with those counterparties to coordinate our planning and operations of those facilities. But really, SaskPower is responsible for the transmission lines within the provincial boundaries.
Oh, thanks. And that's a good reminder. Like, I really encourage folks to use the Q&A feature. Get those questions in. We're going to try to take them as they come or as we're on those topics. So yeah, post them in. You don't have to wait till the end of the session. Like, we'll try to filter them through and answer them as best we can as we go. So no, good participating in there, and thanks for watching that too, Andrew. There's another question that popped up in there that, you know, it might be more in Brumman's wheelhouse, but it relates to this map. And so you can notice that that cluster of stations is largely where our population centers are. And the question here is, I always hear SaskPower talking about building power generation near urban center or where our population is higher, but not up north. And why is that?
Essentially, it's a balance between where the generation is sited versus where the generation has to go. So locating closer to load centers allows us to gain efficiencies with less transmission losses of having to transmit that power over long distances and then distribute it. The balance is that siting of generation also requires other resources like availability of water, availability of resources to construct, footprints, a lot of things. So it's a lot of a balancing act on putting generation where it makes the most sense, so we can balance the cost of integrating with transmission versus where the load actually is.
Yeah, Rob, that's a good point, because you know, like Coronach is not very densely populated, but there's a coal plant there because the coal's there, right? Like that's why that coal plant exists there. It's not because it's near a load center, it's because that's where the coal is. So it makes sense to build a power plant right where the coal is.
And this map shows a good indication, like Andrew said, about where the transmission is on our system as well. And you can see Coronach at the bottom, at the center of the map, and you've got multiple transmission lines going towards Regina, going towards Moose Jaw, going towards Assiniboia.
Yeah, and maybe also too, like another thing is like for natural gas, like there is a pipeline that kind of runs, like the Trans-Canada Gas Pipeline or TPL pipeline, kind of runs diagonally from that NG2 up by Lloydminster down kind of across the province. So when siting projects like gas plants, it makes sense to kind of put them near where those pipelines are. So that's why you don't see a gas plant way up north or way off to the side or something like that. They kind of follow where that pipeline is, just to be able to reduce costs and be efficient with where we construct these things.
Oh, thanks. It's a lot of interest, and I see more and more interest in people wanting to know where our power comes from. So, you know, this map shows like our theoretical capacity, if I understand it right. So if all the options are on and we're generating at 100%, this is how much we could produce. On the engagement side, we get more and more questions and more people being curious about what the actual is. What are we actually producing at the time? And so we've recently started to share what those numbers look like. So I'm going to ask Anna to drop in the chat a link to our new dashboard. And so if you go to that dashboard, you can see, you know, how much power we're generating, you know, today using, you know, those different supply mixes, whether it be coal or wind or gas or hydro and so on. So no, I encourage you to go play around with that link as well. Now, when I looked at that link earlier today, it looks like on a day like today, we can generate more power than we need. And so it seems like we might have the ability to choose certain options. Like, why might we choose certain supply options over others? Yeah,
so that's a good point. There's a number of factors that go into what generation we add. The probably two main ones is probably performance, like what can they do. So we always have to balance the demand for electricity with the generation in real time, like instantaneously. It always has to be perfectly in sync. Otherwise, what would happen is, going back to the transmission system, if we had too much power in Saskatchewan, we'd be pushing energy outside on our tie lines. And if we're generating too less or not enough, then we'd be pulling the energy in. So it's just like the physics of the power system. it's just going to flow that way. And so I kind of relate that to being either a good neighbor or a bad neighbor. Like we want to control our tie lines so that things are in balance and the flow is where people expect it. And we don't want to be relying on our neighbors too much and being a bad neighbor, or by either pushing energy to them or pulling energy from them. So that we need to be able to control how much generation we have to be able to meet the demand. So we want to make sure that we have dispatchable generation that we can, turn the knob up and down to be able to produce more or less when we need it. So that'd be one factor on the operation side, like how we control them. And then the other side would be economics, like what are the costs to operate them, and then also to integrate them into our system. So things like wind, once you build them, the power's free basically. Like there's some ongoing OM&A costs and things like that, or maybe it's a power purchase agreement. But once you spend the money up front to build the facility, build the asset, and then you get the energy afterwards. And so we want to obviously make use of that as much as possible. But we can't have just that, because we need to be able to, as I mentioned, be able to balance load and demand, or supply and demand, so we're not pushing energy out on our tie lines or pulling it in too much. So those would be kind of the two main things, would be kind of the economics, and then the performance would be what we choose to operate or to build and maintain.
Thanks. How do our greenhouse gas emissions and goals to reduce tie into that as well? Do they play a role in which options or which generation sources we're choosing? Yeah,
definitely. We definitely take emissions into consideration. We're on track to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% from 2005 levels by 2030. So that's a policy objective that SaskPower set that we're on target for. There is also national targets to be net zero by 2050 that SaskPower is working on, putting plans in place to achieve that as well, if not by then, but we're sooner. So yeah, we definitely take in emissions as policy objectives and things like that. And then the emissions also through policy decisions play in economics as well. So carbon tax and greenhouse gas emissions are certainly a factor that are changing some of the economics in how what used to be a low cost generation source like coal is now becoming more and more expensive as the cost of the CO2 emissions are becoming more and more costly, or they increase. So that's changed. 20 years ago, coal was very cheap to operate. The question was like run it as much as you can. And now that shift, because of the policy decisions that governments have made in implementing carbon pricing, have changed that. So now things like natural gas generation's less expensive than coal generation, and the carbon prices are only going to keep going higher, and that impact's going to be felt even more. And it has made even adding wind and solar, the economics around those become more favorable too, because they don't have emissions, so they're not paying carbon tax, so they're at an advantage that way. So there's reasons why we want to incorporate as much renewable generation as we can. On the flip side, we have to make sure the grid's reliable and we're being good neighbors, not overproducing or underproducing. And so that's where we have to have that delicate balance in how much we can add for this purpose versus how much we can add for that purpose.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to pull one more question from the chat when we're talking about supply options, and I'm not sure if it exactly fits here, but maybe it's a question around talk around the lithium battery storage. Are there plans about, and it's worded here as flow battery storage. I'm not sure if that's.
Yeah, so SaskPower does have plans to do a battery project near Regina. I think I'm talking a little bit outside my expertise, but I'm pretty sure it's a lithium ion technology. It's not a flow battery. I think as the battery technologies develop, I think SaskPower is certainly actively engaged in looking at all of them, and things like I think for SaskPower, when it comes to batteries, I think we're more interested in letting the market help us decide what type of battery to add. We would be more interested in putting out the specs, like we want the battery this size. What's the best technology and solution that can achieve that? And if it's lithium, if it's flow, if it's something else that's a proven technology, then we would certainly be interested in, we go with whatever provides the best value for our rate base and our ratepayers, for our customers. So I think we're not pinned for one technology or another, and as technologies evolve, then those, as the market changes, then that'll probably dictate what technology gets incorporated.
Yeah, our first utility scale battery at Fleet Street switching station in Regina is lithium ion. And as Andrew mentioned, we're looking at adoption in the industry on technology, but future states of other battery projects in the province, flow batteries and other technologies and other makeups of batteries are being evaluated, not just by us, by other utilities as well.
Yeah. Okay, I think we should likely switch gears a little bit. I know our colleagues last week spent a lot of time talking about the supply options and some of the policies and how they're changing, and our desire to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm sure we could spend the rest of our hour here, but let's pivot just a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the grid. So it's a term I've used a couple of times already. It's often how we, or I at least, refer to our electrical system. So that grid, it sounds organized, and I think the more we chat today, the more we're going to learn or unpack. It's a fairly complicated system. My first question is probably to you, Robin. What is the grid, or why do we even call it that?
It's a good question, Travis, and this graphic, as well as the previous graphic, are good examples of the grid just being a networked connection. A simple analogy to our electrical system, which the previous image kind of showcases, is you can think of our electrical grid as the same as our provincial highways. Just like our highways and roads connect cities, towns, and villages all over the province, our transmission and distribution lines grid up our generators and loads across the province as well. Cars move on a highway like power moves on a transmission line. If one highway is closed or a transmission line is down, power can usually take a detour to a parallel road or line in order to get to the same destination. This is one of the many benefits, if not, there's many benefits, but this is one of them as it relates to redundancy, by having a gridded system. In the early days of electricity in the province, electricity was largely unavailable outside of large centers. So most electrical utilities were owned either privately or by municipalities, and none of them were interconnected to each other. Because each utility operated independently, rates varied significantly between communities. So we had rapid growth in the province in the first decades of the century, and that led to a sharp increase in demand for electricity. The province, it was evident and obvious that inexpensive power was hampering development in the industry in the province. So the province began purchasing these independently owned electric utilities with the goal of interconnecting them and gridding them up. SaskPower ultimately was created in 1949 and purchased what remained of those small independent electric utilities, and began integrating what we know today as our province-wide electrical grid.
Hey, Roman, I got a question for you now.
Sure.
You just talked about how we went from decentralized to centralized. Do you think we're kind of coming full circle again a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit of a teaser for a future webinar that I know Travis and his team have set up as it relates to distributed energy resources. But yes, as we look and see customer-owned generation happening, solar panels and other forms happening on the distribution system, we are seeing a shift exactly of that from decentralized to centralized, back to decentralized. Again, the grid connection provides that connectivity such that we can leverage both aspects as compared to having the decentralized approach of the past, where there was no ability to be good neighbors with each other within the community of Saskatchewan as well.
So maybe we can get the best of both worlds down the line.
That'd be a good goal. I love that that road analogy you used, Robin. Like a highway map is it's something I'm familiar with, and I think more and more people are accustomed to now that our friends at Google and Apple have essentially put that on every smart device, and it's more and more in everybody's car. Like I can visualize the highway map, and like you said, when you reference back to that last graphic we had up, it looked a little bit like a highway map with the different colored blotches and the lines in between. It's a good analogy, and I think when I first saw one of our facility maps, it like at a glance, it just looked like a highway map sitting on the wall. It's good. I want to drill down into a couple terms that you referenced over those last two questions. You talked a little bit about the transmission lines, which I see highlighted on here, and distribution lines. So can you maybe break down just a little bit more what's happening in this image, and talk specifically about like what is the difference between a transmission line and a distribution line?
Sure, Travis. This image is really good. Shows a good flow of power on our system. So what the picture shows is electricity first being generated at power stations. The voltage of that electricity is then raised so that we can more effectively transmit it over long distances via our transmission lines. Our transmission lines form an interconnected network, the grid, like we just talked about, between our generating stations and major urban and industrial centers across the province. And just fun fact, Saskatchewan has over 14,000 circuit kilometers of transmission power lines. That's more than the distance between Vancouver and St. John's and back again. Once we get to our major centers, the voltage of our electricity is reduced to a lower level that is more suitable for being dispersed by our distribution lines across the province. Our distribution system safely delivers power to residential, farm, commercial, and oil field customers. And another fun fact, we have about 143,000 circuit kilometers of distribution lines in the province. That's enough to wrap around the globe about 3.5 times. So there's tons of poles and wires in this province. Back to the road analogy that we used to give better context, transmission lines would be the equivalent to our highways, efficiently allowing the flow of traffic for long distances throughout the province. And our distribution lines would be similar to our local city roads, where we can get to your house and to your place of work.
Oh, thanks. It's a massive amount of infrastructure. Like when you talk about those lines, it's almost like I can't picture a line wrapping around the earth 3 times. And I also love that you use the word fun fact. Other fun fact, and I just heard this the other day, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, because it's not validated, but I thought somebody in our company said we have more power poles than people in this province. And I don't know how many power poles we have, but I know like we have 1.1, we're pushing 1.2 million people. Is that a true stat?
Yeah, at one point it probably still is, but industry is growing, population in the province is growing, and in coincident to that, we got to build more transmission and distribution lines too. So I think it'll always be a fun fact for us in Saskatchewan.
Let's slide to the next one. Okay, so I got a poll. I think we're gonna push out now. I want to pivot our conversation again, and we've touched on the like where we're generating power. We've touched a little bit on like the massive amount of infrastructure that makes up that grid. I want to start talking about the supply versus demand piece of moving that power around. So Anna's got a poll she's going to push out, and it's again just a little fun fact, which I'm gonna lean heavily into to see like what time of day or when do we see our highest demand for electricity on average, on an average day. Is that poll up now? I don't know if I see it.
Maybe Travis, while they're answering the poll, I see there's a question that came in. Someone was asking if we could explain the function of a substation. Raman, do you think you could handle that?
Of course I can. Substations or switching stations, essentially that's where we have our voltage conversion happening. So as I talked about for transmission lines, where we step the voltage up, Switching stations is where we typically do that. Is we'll step the voltage up, or even at a generating station, we'll step the voltage up for transmission purposes. Substations are typically distribution oriented, and that's where we're stepping the voltage down. So distribution substations essentially is where we step the voltage down to serve load, and switching stations, which are transmission stations, is where we step the voltage up to transmit it over longer distances.
Perfect. I learned something else too now today, so that's good.
Good. Okay, I see our poll was up and most people answered it, and I was only able to trip up 10% of our crew here that joined and in answering. So I asked again, when do we typically see the highest demand? I wanted to know if people thought it was at that breakfast time and getting ready for your the school run and the office hours, or if it was during our typical office hours. If we hit that peak at supper time, or if it's sometime in the middle of the night on a cold winter's night, maybe. Pretty well everybody hit the nail on the head and said it was supper time. So I don't know if we're going to educate anybody here, but Andrew, why would that be our peak?
Yeah, I guess if you think of maybe when we hit our system peak, like the most demand for the year, it's typically on a cold December evening around supper time, when you picture December in Saskatchewan, it's dark by 4 o'clock and minus 20 to below. So at supper time, people are coming home, they're turning the heat on, getting their ovens turned on for cooking supper, get the stoves going. They turn the lights on, they get the Christmas lights going. So you can see, and also at that same time, all the businesses that during the day are still open, they still have their lights on. Industry like potash mines and oil fields are for the most part running 24/7. So they're always consuming electricity. So the real uptake in demand is around that supper time, when people are coming home from work and getting supper started and turn the lights on and the heat on their house. Yeah. And then maybe too in the summertime, it's kind of the same thing, but they get home and they want to have a cool house, so they turn the air conditioning on and again are cooking supper and things like that. So yeah, so that's why it's around summertime is when SaskPower experiences its most demand during the day.
Okay. Now, would that be a really big swing in how much power we use? Like, is this a small bump or a spike, or is this, like I said, a giant spike in how our customers are using power? And is it something that our consumers should even be aware of, or try to change our habits, I guess, to support us hitting those loads? So I'm not suggesting I eat supper at a different time of day, but perhaps I could be pushing activities like laundry to a different part of the day, or maybe not doing it at all.
Yeah, so yes and no. Like for Saskatchewan, our load's pretty flat. Like it's pretty constant, because the majority of our electricity demand is for industrial customers that as I mentioned, they're running, their operations are 24/7. They're always consuming electricity. Where you see big swings, like in places like Ontario that have a very large residential population, that there's many people coming home from work and turn their TVs on and lights on and cooking supper at their house. That creates more significant demand. And also too, in Ontario, they have a fair bit of baseload nuclear generation that they run 24/7. So they actually get in trouble, or part of their problem is at the middle of the night, when the load's low and people will go to bed and they turn off their lights and things like that, they still are producing electricity from these nuclear facilities, and they need to have some place for that energy to go. As I mentioned, they always have to be in balance. They have to have supply and demand match up. And now we're seeing, if places that add a lot of wind, they get in a bit of a challenge when they have all this, like if it's on a windy day at night and there's not a lot of demand, then where's that energy go? And they've got to find a place to put it. But in Saskatchewan, we're pretty constant with our load in demand from 1 hour to the next. And then also too, I guess another thing is that the generation that we use to kind of match the load, like we call it like on the margin. So that last incremental megawatt of generation is typically coming from a gas plant in Saskatchewan, like a natural gas generating facility. So for SaskPower, it doesn't really make a lot of difference if you do your laundry at 2 a.m. or at supper time.
All right. Well, thanks for comforting me that my habits don't have a huge impact, but I'm not gonna lie, it's a little disappointing. I need to find another excuse not to do my own laundry. I heard we hit a new peak. I think it was this winter, this December. You talked about that being our kind of peak season. Is that because it was an exceptionally cold December? Like I come out of most winters thinking that was the worst one yet. Was this the worst winter yet, or is it typical for us just to hit a new peak year over year?
Yeah, we typically, like as the province grows and the population grows, there's new industry developed in the province, and then that load's gonna grow. I think as Ron mentioned earlier in this chat, it was in that like 2010, 2015 kind of range where there's a lot of economic activity in the province. We saw record load growth for SaskPower. Now we don't have that same record load growth now, but there is still load growth. We're still projecting, there's new potash mines being developed. There's canola crushing plants that we hear in the news, and that energy's got to come from somewhere. So that's incremental load growth for SaskPower that we need to serve. Part of the challenge for SaskPower is trying to forecast what that load growth is going to be. As you can imagine, we just came off a pandemic, and now we're kind of going back into I don't know what the future is, if there's lots of inflation and other things going on, economic drivers, but there's lots of variables for SaskPower to consider when we are trying to forecast what that demand is. And to do that, we work with our industrial customers to try to get insights on what their plans are for if they're going to expand a facility or open up a new potash mine or things like that. And then we also work with our provincial government counterparts in their projections on population growth and things like that, and try to make projections and estimates on what that load's going to be in the future. But as I mentioned, there's lots of variables to consider, and it's a bit of a science and a bit of an art trying to figure that out.
Oh, thanks. Let's look at time. Let's flip to our next topic here. So we've talked a little bit about the variability of that demand. So like I said, those peak seasons, those peak time of days, and that fluctuating power. Now, not to jump too far back into our supply options, because I said I was going to table that, but I hear that same variability word used when we talk about supply and generation. So could we maybe uncouple like what we mean when we say base load power and variable power options? There's a couple terms that I think we've used over the last few minutes here.
I can jump in for that one, Travis. So base load supply options, they're generation sources like coal, some forms of natural gas, hydro, and even nuclear. These types of generation, they just have a hard time with constant change on their output levels, and they're best and most efficient operated at a constant power output. So that's what when we say base load is what we refer to. Variable supply options, they're generation sources like wind and solar. And those are options that can only produce when the conditions allow and are constantly changing. It's not always windy in Saskatchewan, even though we think it is. It's not always sunny as well. And we need to have plans for when these sources are not there as well. From a system perspective, we essentially need to have enough base load to meet our demand. Variable options, because of their intermittency, because they're not always there, add complexity to the system as we manage balancing load and generation in real time, like Andrew mentioned.
Okay, now that between that fluctuating demand and that fluctuating availability of power from some of those options, it sounds incredibly hard to manage. Before I drill into that a little bit, I did get another question in the chat about supply options, and it was someone asked, CCUS seems to be the only technology that lowers emissions, and why don't we use more of it? I'm not sure. Is it CCUS maybe like carbon capture and storage, or is
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like carbon capture and storage, I think it's really the economics are the challenge, and part of that is also making sure as when for carbon capture projects, there's an off-taker that takes the CO2, and there just hasn't been enough interest in or commitment from an off-taker to make that help that project become cost-effective for SaskPower. So that's one consideration in there for the carbon capture projects.
Okay, I'm gonna throw back to you, Robin. And so my next question and a question from the chat are fairly closely tied. So I wanted to drill down a little bit more into that fluctuating of power. Like I said, that ebb and flow of supply and the ebb and flow of demand, and like how does SaskPower manage all of those unknowns? And there's a question in the chat that's similar in wanting to know. Oh, I lost it now. Where does the excess generation go? Or is it controlled by off and on generation? And so some goes out of the province, but only if needed. So it's they kind of tied together. Do you think you can handle that one?
Yeah, no problem. In terms of how the power demand is managed, SaskPower, we've got a team of highly trained system operators whose job is to do exactly that, manage the power so that it's safe, reliable, and efficiently used across the province. Andrew mentioned this earlier as well, is that there's instances where we have more power than we have load, and opposite when we have less power and more load. And that's where our interties with other jurisdictions is our ability to push and pull from our neighbors, and be able to push in scenarios when we have too much power, and likewise pull from those neighbors as well when we don't have enough power. But our system operators, they have such a complicated task, because there's countless interactions within the system every day, if not even every hour, that's giving them notifications, inputs, alarms, variables, whatnot, to help them inform and allow them to leverage the best way to operate our power system within the province.
Yeah, and also maybe another fun fact for people is SaskPower has an energy marketing arm called Northpoint that they buy and sell electricity for SaskPower. So they'll sell SaskPower, it'll sell electricity to Alberta or to North Dakota. So there's that part of the equation as well, that if we have too much, then we can sell it to our neighbors as well through Northpoint.
Oh, thanks for that. That's fantastic. So again, like most of this sounds incredibly complicated to me. Like I said, managing those ebbs and flows and buying and selling power, and there's a lot of variables to consider, even in a controlled setting. And we don't live in a controlled setting, and there's other variables that I imagine make this even more complicated. So up on the screen, there's some of the additional challenges we have to keep the lights on. Now, what jumps out to me when looking at this pie is the aging infrastructure. And so having that aging grid highlighted as the #1 reason we lose power, like, shouldn't we be addressing that #1 issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, reliable service is always a priority for SaskPower. We know people are experiencing longer outages, and that is certainly an inconvenience. And we need to invest in our aging infrastructure so that we can address those challenges. Unplanned power outages are caused by a variety of factors. Some are outside of our control, like weather, animals, things like that. But there are things in our control, like the condition of those assets, that we need to properly manage, which we work on every day doing. Our focus is on renewing our electrical system so that we can provide power to people when they need it. And failing to do so will result in more system issues and power outages that people experience. Some of the maintenance we do does require to have planned outages to be able to take things offline so we can fix them up. And we understand that's an inconvenience, but it's kind of a necessary thing that we need to do to be able to make sure we keep the system operating as reliably as we can.
Thanks. I'm going to put a quick plug in for our outage center. So like I said, we need to know about outages in order to be able to address them. And so Adam, maybe you can throw this into the chat too. Our phone number for the outage center is 310-2220. It's toll free. It's available 24/7. So if there is an outage, like please report it, and then our outage center can take the appropriate action. So when it comes to responding to an outage, I imagine, or I've heard, there's notable difference across the province. Andrew, would you be able to chat a little bit about what some of those differences are?
Yeah, for sure. So some of the differences are just the distance and space between where places are. So you can imagine in an urban setting, like in downtown Regina, would be different than a remote setting, say at the end of a long radial transmission line, like up in northern Saskatchewan. Those differences exist. So things like how long it takes for the crews to get out to be able to fix the issue. In those more densely populated areas, you don't have to go as far to, like, the travel time's less. But if you have to drive a few hours just to get to where the problem is, and that's certainly going to add some time. Also, there's some places have redundancy kind of built in, like a long radial line. If it's down, there's no other ways to supply it. But if you're connected in a place where one line goes down, but you can backfeed it through another way, then that certainly helps reduce the amount of outage time as well.
There's a question in the chat that's related to this, and then the questions around, like, what's our contingency plan for power distribution in case of a major disaster like what we're seeing in the East recently?
Yeah, so Brahman, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can. We've got a spare equipment strategy, especially for transmission structures, where we hold an inventory of, I believe it's 10 kilometers of wood poles to have on hand available infrastructure to go replace, say a plow wind goes through or a tornado or something, so we can build a bypass without having to wait for material to come. We talked about redundancy. That's one of the benefits of a grid, but there are some, corner of the system scenarios where there is only one line, there's only one radial line, just like for our highways, there's only one road to a town or a city. If that gets washed out or it gets blown down, we've got other avenues that'll take a little bit more time, but we'll still get the power back on.
Yeah, and maybe also to that, like, I just from my own experience, like, SaskPower is not perfect, but I think when our backs are against the wall and there's in a crisis, I think SaskPower is excellent at responding to those. Like, if there is an event like they had out east, then there's procedures in place, like they'll form an incident response center and go into that kind of firefighting mode to get people back on, electricity back on as soon as possible.
And our neighboring utilities help too, just like the neighboring utilities out east are helping each other now. Emergency transfers of power and even we've had instances where we've sent crews to other jurisdictions to go help out and build new transmission or repairs or whatever. There's a good partnership in the utility industry to help out when major catastrophes happen.
Yeah, there was that big outage in Texas last year that happened, and SaskPower sent they sent emergency energy to that area to extra electricity to help them out. Yeah.
It's interesting. All part of the benefit of the interconnected grid, right? And having those tie lines across your jurisdictions. Good point. We're getting low-ish on time. We've got a little bit more I wanted to touch on. See if I can get this. I got a little video to queue up our next topic.
We're committed to transforming Saskatchewan's power future by using 50% renewable sources by 2030. Smart grid technology is the only way that together we can achieve this goal. In the future, you may want to generate power from sources like solar and wind. With the help of a smart grid, we'll be able to manage large amounts of customer-generated power safely and efficiently. But that's not the only benefit. Real-time meter reads will eliminate any surprises on your bill, and shorter power outages will provide you with increased stability and peace of mind. All told, smart meters as a part of a smart grid will give you more control and access to your own power. Most of today's electric system was built over 50 years ago and uses one-way communication. This means that we send electricity to your home or business and need to rely on manually reading your meter. That's not very efficient. But technology is rapidly changing. As electricity needs change, our aging system won't be able to keep up with growing demands. Two-way communication between your home and SaskPower becomes possible with a smart grid. Electricity and information can be shared. This means a power grid that is safer, more efficient and reliable, and will meet our province's needs for electricity decades from now. Smart technology is the smart choice. Learn more at saskpower.com/smartgrid.
All right, so after watching that video, well, a couple things popped into mind. So first I heard that, that smart grid technology, could lead to shorter power outages, which sounds like a great benefit, especially from our last topic. But how exactly is a smart grid going to accomplish that?
I can jump on that one, Travis. It all comes down to analytics. So the more visibility and data we can get from the system in real time, the quicker we can develop plans and actually action those plans based on that data. As we mentioned earlier, and historically, SaskPower has leaned on customers to report outages to help us pinpoint and locate where the problems are on our distribution system mainly. With the integration of smart technologies and ultimately a province-wide distribution level control center, we're going to be able to pinpoint problems and even get to a point where we can proactively identify and resolve problems before they actually become a problem. And like the video said, the ultimate goal here is to have shorter and hopefully fewer power outages as a whole.
I like it. The other thing that, watching that video that cued me was I heard the word smart a lot. I heard the word smart meters, we talked smart grid, we talked smart technology. In this context, Raman, what does smart actually mean?
It means the same as when we talk about smartphones. It's essentially just increasing the capability and functionality of devices and that we already have. So in the field, smart meters is what we're talking about. They're still going to do the same thing of recording the demand from your home, but the smart aspect allows us to bring that data back, back in real time, and actually do some troubleshooting and some other analytics based on it, as compared to just having how much demand you actually had at your home. So an analogy here is that we'll be able to see individual power outages, whether it's an individual home or a whole block or a whole subdivision. That's going to help SaskPower have more, again, real-time information around troubleshooting and problem solving. We will have better information to dispatch our crews. We'll have better information around potentially what the problem is, compared to just patrolling and waiting for customer calls and complaints, honestly, to come in that the power's been out and it's been out for a long time.
Hey, thanks. I have a related question. So we heard like smart meters and the role they'll play in that two-way communication and allowing for some of that two-way flow of power too. And so there's a question here about what part will customers or others play in providing generation in the future? So that distributed energy piece.
There's lots of options available there, and customer solar generation is a good partnership that SaskPower can have with our customers where they want to generate on site or closer to their home. The key, though, like the video said, is going to be able to have that two-way power flow and that two-way communication, so we can understand what is being connected to our system on the distribution level. A more meaningful example is that historically, when we have a crew working on a distribution line, we'd isolate the source side, so the SaskPower side, before the crew would start working on the line. But now that we see and know about potential new sources of generation on the other side of the line, the customer side of the line, there's more planning, there's more caution, there's more safeguards that are required to just make sure that our crews are safe when they're working on our distribution lines. And that's where the smart meter technology, the smart grid as a whole, will help us get that data and that visibility to make sure that we're continuing to operate and maintain our lines in a safe manner.
No, it's good. That's I was gonna say that was our last question, and a good segue into our next topic, because I know next week, or not next week, 2 weeks from now, on October 18th, our team is going to be hosting another one of these sessions, and it's focused around how small scale technologies is evolving. And so that's a lot about that self-generation from solar and wind, or energy storage options, or things like electrical vehicles and batteries and more. So that's coming up, and I'll share that at the very end before we close. I'm just popping back into the chat here. So would distributed or private generation erode grid reliability over time? If large industrial customers and residential users provide their own power, does that take away the revenue from SaskPower for critical maintenance and upgrades?
Travis, I want to say that's a great question to ask in the next the webinar, because it'll be some good content behind distributed energy resources, and it'll fit the good framework for asking that question then.
Good. I appreciate that answer. And so Bram, I'm going to ask you to go sign up for our next session, which I'm going to post up right here. So you can see, like, this is our second of a 5-part series. So there's three or more of these coming, and that next conversation is going to be around that distributed energy piece. And so I encourage you guys to sign up for that one, as well as the two to follow. They're going to be focusing in on the nuclear power. So we'll start with that why nuclear piece, and why it might be a good supply option for Saskatchewan, and then that last one will be focused in on more of that technology piece itself, on how nuclear power works, because it'll be a new technology for Saskatchewan if we choose to build one. So also up on the screen, sorry, I'm darting around here. So we have a link to our engagement hub. Again, I made a plug for this at the very beginning. There's lots of engagement tools here. You can go to that site, ask a question, then I'll come to someone like me and be answered by someone much smarter. Or you can share an idea. You can, there's one of those pages has a map you can interact with. There's a few options there. You can also sign up for these sessions on that engagement page, that online engagement hub. And then we've shared the dashboard in the chat as well. So I encourage you to go check out all of those things, and keep coming back, keep sending in questions and engaging with us. I appreciate that so many of you took the time to spend your lunch with us, and thank you from myself and everyone at SaskPower, and thank you, Raman and Andrew, for taking time out of your day to join us.